meant to operate on the peak stress curve. We're not meant to be stressed all day. We're meant to find moments in the day where we do feel a bit anxious, we do feel a little bit under the pump, because that actually unlocks more potential.
Hey there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Delivering Marketing Joy. I am your host, Kirby Hossman. Joining me today is a brand new rock star. Super pumped to dive into the topics today. He's a former fighter pilot and Amazon bestselling author and the CEO of Afterburner, Christian Boucousis. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kirby. It's a real pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited to dive into this. I don't get a lot of fighter pilots reaching out. And so this is super interesting to me.
So because we're all shy, we shuffle around, look at our feet. You know, it's not a very fighter pilot thing to reach out and talk. As much as we love talking about ourselves, we don't tend to proactively reach out and do it.
Well, I appreciate you doing it, man. I think this is going to be really interesting because, you know, obviously you spent years as a fighter pilot before moving into business leadership, which is an interesting transition. So what lessons from the cockpit translate most directly into the business world?
Well, a lot, but you've got to be open to it. I mean, that's the biggest challenge. When you operate in an environment where consequences measured in life and death, where complexity is a quantum above what the complexity is of an average business, you know, you learn, I guess, at the core that being a fighter pilot's not about investing in your strengths. It's about mitigating all your weaknesses as a human being. Because as a human being, your biases, beliefs, and behaviors are very on show in the cockpit of a fighter jet. And they're on show second by second, minute by minute. It's really nowhere to hide. So what it teaches you is, you know, getting things done is deeply human. And a lot of the challenges we have on a pathway to achieving a significant aspiration is predominantly self-induced. But our core programming as humanity is to really look at the world as its fault, rather than look at ourselves and say it's my fault. And then as a fighter pilot, they spend an awful lot of money, $15 million, training that out of you. The flying is kind of a byproduct of that, because the better you are at self-critique, the better you are at personal growth, the better you become as a fighter pilot. So it's a really interesting environment and a very interesting culture that celebrates the fact that we make mistakes. It's just part of the journey, and that's where the gold is for your personal growth, both as a leader and as an individual.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, yeah, I always say that a lot of people are much more interested in pointing a finger than the thumb, right? Like there's so many opportunities for growth when we allow for it. That's really, really interesting. So you referenced it because, you know, in aviation, I mean, mistakes can be catastrophic. But in business, you know, mistakes hopefully are a little bit more survivable than that. But pressure can still be intense. So how should leaders think about performance under pressure?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is I suggest that you create less pressure. Pressure in business is normally because we didn't think about what we're going to doing before we did it. And then when it happened, it's like, oh my gosh, it didn't work as planned, like it's a surprise. More often than not, that's the case. And then understand that pressure is a privilege. Like as a human being, we're meant to operate on the peak stress curve. We're not meant to be stressed all day. We're meant to find moments in the day where we do feel a bit anxious. We do feel a little bit under the pump, because that actually unlocks more potential. I call it the free climber effect. If you look at a rock climber that climbs without a rope, they tend to climb more complex climbs because they're so much more energized in the moment because the consequence is so severe. So I think, you know, as a leader, understanding pressure is a good thing, but after every moment of pressure, it's to embrace what fighter pilots call debriefing and say, why did that happen? And before we ask why did it happen, we have to define what good looked like, what should have happened. Typically in business, what should have happened is very ill-defined. It's defined in intention, and it's defined as an idea, but it's not really defined as somewhere that you land. It's not defined as a really tangible destination. So for leaders, it's appreciating that let's enjoy the pressure, but if it's too much and too often, we've got to reflect on that. I call that ORCA, It's just a simple 4-step process where you ask yourself, what was the objective? So what did good look like? R is the result or your reality, which is what actually happened. C is curiosity or the cause. And this is where you take a journey of self. And as the Blue Angels so eloquently put it, it's to say, I made a mistake, I fess up to it, and I fix it, and I'm happy to be here. But the most important part of the whole thing is the A part, which is action. And do something different tomorrow to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And you can replace action with a new behavior, because if you act differently, you behave differently. And if you act the same way all the time, that turns into something that we call a habit. So the byproduct of this intentional reflection is you grow as a human being, the repetitive mistakes start to iron out, plus you start to have more meaningful conversations. So when we talk about engagement, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about embracing the diversity of a team, this is the conversation where that'll happen.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And I love acronyms and stuff and frameworks like that. So that's really good. And it leads me nicely into my next question, which is you have a framework of plan, debrief, execute, or plan, brief, execute, debrief. You kind of referenced that a little bit, and I think that's fascinating. So can you walk us through that, what that looks like in like a business setting?
Yeah. Well, it's simple. It's like think, communicate, do, and reflect. Like that's really what it is. And that's what we're losing, and particularly as AI becomes more dominant in the workplace, is we're so busy doing, we've eroded the time to do the thinking. We stack calendars from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., understanding that the more you do, the more doing you create. I call it the do loop. So the more doing without thinking creates even more doing. So when we talk about planning, we're just saying we've got to take the ideation and turn it into destination. So the storytelling has to become very targeted as to what we need to achieve. I have chronic ADHD. It's something I only discovered about 3 years ago, so I'm a late bloomer on that. But what I learned through ADHD is humanity, we don't understand time. Like we don't understand how much you can achieve in a day. So we only process things as now or later. That's kind of the best that we get, right? So when you plan, that's when you start to put some guardrails on now and later, and you start to create. This is what we need to achieve on Monday, not do. We don't do to-do lists. We do achieve lists. So this is what I need to achieve on Monday. I need to achieve on Tuesday. This is what I need to achieve by Friday. And we come together and we create that together, like not once a quarter, like once a week. Briefing is instead of meetings and instead of transmission. What's ironic about the word brief is it's not what people say, it's what everyone understands. So briefing's actually a check of understanding, and we ask lots of questions. One thing I did miss in the planning stage as well is because human beings typically operate on perception rather than reality, and because we're kind of run on a hidden program of biases, before we turn a plan into action, we do something called red teaming. And red teaming is where you get someone that's not invested in the outcome of the plan, but understands what you're doing, and you just bounce it off them. It's just a little bit like soundboarding, right?
Right.
Interesting story. Yeah, we're as Afterburner, we've transformed into a fully AI native company, and as we work with Claude and Manus, these tools, as we work with it, it starts to tell us, "Wow, you do things really differently." Like, I really like the way that we're working together. It starts to get a bit weird, right? You're like,
Yeah.
it's talking to me like a friend. And it goes, this whole red teaming and simulation and running the code before we go live. It says, this is really good. And it's helping me solve a lot of problems before we launch the app. And,
Right.
and that's what red teaming is. So before the product launch, let's challenge it as much as we can rather than it be challenged once we've pulled the trigger.
Right.
Execution, I call it missionization. And if you're a student of deep work and flow state, what it means is instead of being busy all day, just create 2 or 3 hours of completely uninterrupted focus time where you do what you said you're going to do in the plan. And then at the end of it, we come back together 15 minutes at the end of the day and we just debrief and we say, how did reality measure up against what we thought was going to happen? And then we tweak things a little bit. We move into another methodology called the ORCA methodology I mentioned earlier. And we do that reflection and we say, This is what we said we'd do by the end of the day. This is what happened. This is why we missed it. And this is the first thing we're going to do tomorrow morning, me, to drive a little bit closer towards Friday's goal.
That's cool. That's really good. And again, like I said, I love frameworks. So this is really, really helpful. And it's funny because it's like, there's some things where I'm like, ooh, that sounds like I'm doing that right. And then there's some things where I'm like, ooh, I could dig into that. So final question for you, Boo. What's the biggest mistake leaders make when operating under pressure?
Like anything, the more pressure you feel, the more primal structures of the brain start to come into it. So you get more emotional, you get more frustrated, you experience the amygdala hijack, where everything just becomes very impulsive and emotion driven. It's not driven by logic. We have a saying in the fighter pilot world, wiggle your toes. And basically, when you're under pressure in an airplane, your natural habit is to grip the controls much harder. And that makes the aircraft way more difficult to fly because it's all jerky, right? So you wiggle your toes, take a breath. We have another saying, which is sit on your hands. If something's going wrong and you don't know what's going on, do not push a button. Just wait, let the amygdala hijack deflate, and let the more intelligent structures of the brain kick in, then solve the problem. So it's creating this space between stimulus and response where you're more rational under pressure rather than impulsive under pressure.
Yeah, that is great. That is really, really, really good stuff. So where can people find more information about you? Because this has been super helpful. Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, callmeboo.com is my website. Afterburner.com is my company. And if you just type my last name, Boucousis, into anything, there's only me, my dad, and my sister. So you'll find me.
I love that. Well, this has been really, really interesting. And I can't wait to, you have a new book coming out.
Yeah, it's coming out this year. It's called Flawless Leadership, the perfect book for the imperfect leader. And what I discovered recently was this endemic of undiagnosed perfectionism in leaders.
Yeah.
There was a study into it last year where this subconscious narrative, and what the book basically says is you've got this voice in your head that you don't control. It's not conscious, telling you that you need to be perfect. And when you feel the need to be perfect, you experience that by being controlling, and you try to take on too much. And then when you take on too much, you get overwhelmed. And when you become overwhelmed, you burn out. And then when you're overwhelmed, you try and be more perfect. So it's called the perfection death spiral. So basically, I use my experience as a fighter pilot, running businesses for 20 years, and bring the methodology that I use as a business owner and that I learned as a fighter pilot to break that cycle, to let go and to be above the action and be more thoughtful. I call it think, act instead of react.
That is awesome. I can't wait to check that out. And yeah, this has been really fun. Let's do it again sometime. Okay.
Thanks, Kirby. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, that's going to wrap up this edition of Delivering Marketing Joy. We'll see you next time.